Hello. I wanted to talk a little bit about mining information out of first or primary sources. You know, it's amazing how much is available actually online that you never have to leave. Never have to leave your own comfortable desk or computer to go and find just a massive amount of first or primary sources. One of those that I've been using for my story are the Federal Writers Project slave narratives that was commissioned under the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration, his works projects administration. So anyway, there are a number of places you can find the slave narratives if that is useful to you in whatever you're working on. My favorite place to go is Gutenberg.org, because at that site they have them separated in their original volumes, and the original volumes were separated out by state, and these are organized by the state in which the interview happened, not necessarily where the person was enslaved. So you might be reading narratives like I was from Alabama and Mississippi, and some of the stories will take you into Texas or Georgia or Virginia. For the purpose of this video today, I'm going to be talking about how you can be going into a primary source looking for a specific segment of information, and it can give you more. You have to be aware of what might be useful to you beyond what you may be looking for. I'm going to use, for example, while I was searching through the Alabama and Mississippi slave narratives, I came across doing a search for Mobile in all of the slave narratives, because that's a PDF document. So I was able to do a search for Mobile, and I found the narrative of Nelson Birdsong. He was living near Mobile. He was born in Montgomery Hill in Baldwin County, Alabama, actually. So anyway, something that caught my eye as I was reading his narrative, he didn't remember much about coming to Mobile, but it seemed like his mammy worked for Mrs. Dunn on Monroe Street, and later they moved on out to Old Napoleonville. In parentheses it says, which is now Crichton, Alabama, a suburb of Mobile. When they were writing out these slave narratives, they often tried to write in a format that would convey the accent of these people, because they had a very unique accent. Some people still speak with an accent very similar to this in the very rural parts of the South. And their accent can be so thick that it's actually difficult to understand. And this is not a race thing or racially confined. It can be Southern accents in general. The more isolated a community gets, the thicker the accent is, and it can be very difficult to understand. So anyway, I made note of that in particular. First of all, it talks about Mrs. Dunn on Monroe Street. I had decided, after going through the classifieds in an 1870 newspaper and finding a piece of property, that I decided that's going to be the piece of property that my character buys. You know, it's just a little bit of fun playing like I'm a character, and I'm able to go and buy a piece of property in 1870 that, of course, even today I would not be able to purchase. But to be able to buy that through my character, it's a little bit of wish fulfillment, I guess. But anyway, I just thought it was an interesting little thing to add into the story, that there's like a legitimate place at that point in time. Who knows who actually bought it, but for my purposes of my story, my character bought it. And so anyway, it's on Monroe Street, and now I know that there's a Mrs. Dunn on Monroe Street. Well, that's just a nice little tidbit. I might add a scene at some point where a neighbor named Mrs. Dunn visits my character. But the thing that's really pertinent to my accuracy for historical fiction is this note about them moving out to Old Napoleonville, which is now Crichton, Alabama. Place names change, and that's something that we sometimes forget. We take for granted that what was called this and has been called whatever for as long as we can remember, like it's always been called that. It's not true. Road name changes. Many people can remember that streets throughout the South after the Civil War had been named after Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy. And then during the Civil Rights Movement, almost universally, those street names got changed in honor of Martin Luther King. So what was once Jefferson Davis Avenue in Mobile is now Martin Luther King Avenue. Things like that happen all the time. And so anyway, Crichton, very well-known neighborhood near Mobile right now, or actually it's in the city now. But if you remember the viral video about the Crichton leprechaun, that's the neighborhood. And now you know that that was once upon a time known as Napoleonville. And now I know it too, because I had never heard that before. So that's, and if I ever need to go in my story out to that neighborhood, that's just something to little click in the back of my mind. Crichton was not Crichton, not back then. There was a couple of other notes. The next one I'll read off to you. Pa and Mammy Den worked for the grist mill out there. I'm trying not to be facetious in reading this, but it is the way it's written. And also owned a big grist mill in DeFork, where the big fire station is now. And the parenthetical note is, which is located at the intersection of St. Francis Street and Washington Avenue, the latter formerly known as Wilkinson Street. This grist mill was burned in the 1870s. Well, this is just a great detail for knowing the layout of the city. Now I know that there was a grist mill on this corner. Don't know that I'll ever refer to it, but there's just a little bit more for me as the author, just a little bit more awareness of how things were different then. You would not have a grist mill in downtown Mobile anymore. You would not see a mill like that right in the middle of downtown. But really, this note about its location and the fact that it was burned in the 1870s, so I know that it was there at this point in time. And the fire station, I know where that is, so I can picture exactly where it is. And that fire station is a historical landmark, so it's just a neat thing to realize that that fire station was as old as it is, and as much as I think of it as being, you know, like one of the original buildings of Mobile, it wasn't really, not going back as far as I am. And then most pivotally is the name of the street. Washington Avenue is a well-known street in Mobile, and it's been Washington Avenue for as long as I can remember. The fact that it was then known as Wilkinson Street is very important to note, since it was a prominent street, since I may come across the name Wilkinson Street in other historical documents for the placement of other landmarks. It's a good thing to keep in mind. So all of this I am putting in my historical notes. I have a document that is all my historical research, and I have tabs. It's a Google Doc document, and I have tabs that one is for Mobile personalities, one is for historical landmarks and the layout of the city. One is a timeline of the Civil War, even though the Civil War is not in the time frame of my book proper, my story itself. Characters, I mean, this is 5 years after the Civil War. It had a dramatic and traumatic impact on the South and on the people. And there are a lot of veterans on both sides walking around in Mobile. So I have a timeline of the Civil War on a tab, just so of all the battles and major events, so that I know how to make references to things that my characters may have encountered in their lives. The last little note, though, in Nelson Birdsong's his narrative, I'll read off to you. This is actually about his wife. And it says, when they finally settled in Mobile, her mother worked for the family of Dr. Eustace, who lived in the corner house now occupied by the new federal courthouse and custom house at St. Louis and St. Joseph Streets. When I first read his narrative and I saw that note, I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I just made a note in my historical document because I know where that federal courthouse is. It's actually a new federal courthouse there that was just built in the last few years in the same location as the old one. I know exactly where that is. It's actually just I used to work in an office on St. Louis Street, so it is right in my neighborhood where I used to frequent all the time. Knew exactly where that was, had no idea who Dr. Eustace was, but now I'm visualizing that as a residential street. The courthouse is not there, it's all houses. And so I just made a note of it in my notes. Well, this becomes super interesting. If we go back to my first video, if you remember, I talked about how history sometimes gives us gifts, and I was talking about what I found out in the census, where two prominent historical figures who are also characters in my book intersect by one being a border of the other. And I already had them kind of working in the same circle of people loosely, but now their world is very intimately connected, and it only enhanced my story, and I felt like that was a big gift. Well, this discovery actually preceded that one, even though I'm telling it to you second. So at the time, like I said, at the time I read this, I didn't know who Dr. Eustace was. I just made a note in my history notes, not knowing how it might be relevant in the future, not ever imagining I would figure out who Dr. Eustace was. But yes, that's exactly where I'm leading. Also in that first video, I was talking about how there were two prominent writers of that time located here in Mobile. One is the famous author or authoress, Augusta Jane Evans Wilson, most successful American authoress of her time. And she is a character. I've decided to make her a character in my book. And the other one is John Forsyth. He was a very prolific newspaper editor at that time. But anyway, where was I? Now I can get so off in the weeds talking about history. Oh yes, okay, Dr. Eustace. Dr. Eustace, later on, I put two and two together because one thing that is well known about Augusta Evans Wilson, that is some of her non-literary writings that she left behind for that you can peruse at one of the local libraries, is she was good friends with a woman named Rachel Eustace. In fact, that was her best friend, supposedly. And she would go by the name Lala Lyons, was her last name. But she married and became Rachel Lyons Eustace. And I think I was trying to get to know Augusta Evans a little bit better one day, and I was really looking into her, and something clicked. I finally went, wait a minute, Rachel Lyons Eustace, and I knew she married a doctor. So that was who, his family was the one that Nelson Birdsong belonged to, or his mammy belonged to, at some point, and I know because of this narrative exactly where they lived. And then later, when I found them in the census, I ended up finding out that Julia Forsyth and Robert Forsyth, that's the brother of John Forsyth, and John Forsyth and his wife, well, let's see, John, all right, how do I say this so I don't confuse you? John Forsyth's brother, Robert, married John Forsyth's wife's sister. So it was two brothers marrying two sisters. And so they're very, very connected family there, very tight-knit family, I mean. And so Julia and Robert showed up on the census just a few lines away from the Eustaces. And all of this I did not expect to see in just a random, almost, slave narrative. And now with the combination of that primary source with the primary source of my census from 1870, I've been able to tie all these threads together. And so just the moral of the story for today's video is how important it is to take what you find in a primary source and not take it for granted. Keep good notes, and especially if you're working in a place like I am, Mobile. Now, 1870 is a long time ago, but it isn't so long ago that life was completely different and records weren't kept or so on. It's kind of actually easy to research. So, and there's so much online, and I plan on going into some of the other things I found that have blown my mind that I did not know were out there and available. I'm talking about like whole historical first-person narrative books about the Civil War. I mean, this isn't like rocket science to people who were already, I guess, Civil War history buffs. They're already looking into all of that. But anyway, this is just a little snippet of what I'm doing for my historical research. The more I learn, the more I discover, the more daunting it is in one way of what I don't know. But it's also thrilling because of all of these threads being woven together. And I just talked to somebody yesterday that I really can't wait to tell you about in another video that also brought home to me how little I know or understand and how audacious it is to think I'm going to be able to write a book that is going to do justice to these people. It's fiction, you know, and the point isn't really to make it biographical about Augusta Jane Evans Wilson or John Forsyth or Margaret Forsyth or Stevens Croom. He's the other guy. Did I mention his name before? I know I told you about him, but I don't know if I said his name, and I finally decided, heck, I'm just, going to talk about this. You're not going to know the story until I get it written. But those are some of the real life people that I want to incorporate in it. And it's not going to be biographical about them. I'm going to try to be as true to what I can learn about their actual personalities and character. I really want to be true to a person's character if I can. And if I can't, then I'll change their name, and they'll be a purely fictional character. But that's my intention, and just to find all of these threads interwoven naturally. And I'm discovering that story while I'm writing a story. It's daunting, it's audacious, and it's fun. So if you are writing any kind of story, I hope that you feel like it's fun. I mean, there's going to be scenes that are such a slog, and I'm in kind of one right now. I've been on vacation all week. Part of my intention has been to write and to research. Well, I've gotten some research done, but the writing, it's just, I'm in a difficult scene. And so I go back to it and I write like a line. I mean, that's how much of a slog it is. But one line is progress. One line means that when I come back to it later and I look at it, I go, yeah, that's not working. And I'll write a different line. Or I'll go, okay, now I can visualize it a little bit better than I was when I was in the middle of trying to write that. So I can write one more line. And it's just, you know, it's just that way. But no matter what, it's fun. It's fun. So I wish you a good, merry time writing whatever it is you're working on. And happy reading, happy writing, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.